Then, the mage spun around, his voice all shaky, and he called out for the king. Hearing that, Adrian just stood there, frozen, like someone had hit pause on his brain. He kept repeating the king's title in disbelief, staring at the calm man who raised his hands to show he wasn't about to throw hands with anyone. But then Regina jumped in, yelling at her brother and demanding to know what the hell he was doing. So, let's rewind 30 minutes, because things were way more chill before all this drama. Regina, our main girl, was having a nice soft chat with some other ladies at a fancy banquet. One of the girls got curious and asked what Callista was like. She smiled and told them it was really different from the capital, much simpler and quieter, and she actually liked how peaceful it felt. But then, out of nowhere, she kind of flinched and looked toward the window. One of the girls noticed and asked if she was okay. Regina apologized super quick and asked if she could go get some fresh air by herself. The girls were cool about it and told her to go ahead, saying the garden was famous and she should take her time. She thanked them for being so understanding and peace out. After she left, the girls started gossiping, saying they didn't get to ask about her dress and that she must be tired since it was her first big party. Meanwhile, our girl was out in the garden, walking around and checking out the flowers. She wondered what kind of flower she was looking at, just saying it out loud to herself. Right then, a dude nearby answered her, telling her it was a lilac. She was surprised, but the man smiled and said, sorry, if he bothered her, explaining he liked the smell too and that's why he spoke up. He asked if she was really into flowers. Then, Regina got a little flustered because she didn't know much about flowers. She just liked how they smelled and said she was thinking about planting those trees on the streets where she lived. The man was interested and asked about the streets. He explained that lilacs were kind of expensive and you almost never saw them in regular gardens, let alone lining a road. She admitted her idea was kind of random, but she imagined how nice it would be if everyone on the street could enjoy the scent together, just from the flowers blooming and the wind blowing. She said there couldn't be a better kind of happiness than that. The man just looked at her like she was some kind of flower genius, even blushing a bit. Then, she realized she was talking way too freely, especially to a stranger, and apologized for saying so much. She laughed at herself and said she hadn't even asked his name. Then things got awkward, with both of them trying to speak at the same time. Regina told him to go first, but he insisted she should. She finally said she just wanted to ask for his name. But, of course, the universe had to mess things up right then. A snake slithered out on the ground, heading straight for her. She totally freaked out, pressing herself against the garden wall. The man's eyes went wide, and he yelled that there was a snake. She screamed that it was getting closer. The dude tried to draw his sword. But before he could do anything, Adrian came flying in out of nowhere, stomped on the snake, and took care of it like a total boss. Jumping back to the present, Regina was standing next to her brother, who looked like he had just run a marathon. She explained to the man what had just happened. Both she and her brother bowed deeply, looking super embarrassed. Then, our hero apologized, saying he thought the man was some kind of attacker. Regina said sorry too, admitting she didn't recognize who he was, and had been rude. The Emperor, yeah, that was the dude this whole time, laughed it off, and told them not to worry about it, saying it was an easy mistake, and he also drew his sword too fast. He said only the royals were allowed to carry weapons at banquets, but it was lucky that nobody got hurt. Even though the Emperor was cool about it, the mage still looked super tense, guarding the Emperor like some kind of watchdog. Adrian suddenly realized the truth. The man they almost attacked was none other than the Emperor of Rosenbaum himself, Lates Crowell Carter III. The Emperor told his mage, Ivan, to relax. Then, our boy also figured out that this Ivan dude, who always stayed close to the Emperor, was the Imperial Grand Archmage, the strongest mage in the whole continent. Ivan just crossed his arms and stared at Adrian with the kind of look that says, don't try anything funny, bro. Right then, a couple of guards showed up, asking if anyone had heard a commotion. One guard said he definitely heard screaming. Everyone in the garden tensed up. Our hero, thinking fast, whispered Mirage and used some magic to make everyone invisible. The guards looked around and saw nothing, so they decided to check somewhere else. Then, Adrian told the Emperor and Ivan that he didn't want anyone important getting mixed up in his mess, so he put up a temporary magic barrier. He explained that the guards couldn't see them now. Regina looked at Adrian like he was a magician from another planet, completely blown away. But Ivan, still not chill, grabbed Adrian's wrist and asked if he just cast Mirage, a crazy strong spell that only a top mage could do. Ivan freaked out even more, saying Adrian just activated it with a single word, no long spell, or anything. He couldn't believe his ears. Then our hero tried to apologize again, but Ivan cut him off, saying that the magic Adrian just used was way more important than anything else that had happened. The Emperor calmed Ivan down, thanked Adrian for helping, and asked for their names. But Ivan wouldn't let it go, and kept reminding everyone that Adrian used sixth circle magic, which was kind of insane. Adrian finally pulled himself together and introduced himself as Count Adrian von Callista. Then her sister followed up, saying she was Regina von Callista. Now, inside our boy's head, things were far from chill. He started thinking that the Emperor was basically a puppet with no real power and always controlled by some big shots like Townsend and McCarthy. Adrian thought the Emperor couldn't even look close to any noble family, so it was wild that he was out here at a public party. As the Emperor and his mage Ivan walked away, he smiled at them and said he hoped they could talk more next time. Our hero was still lost in his own head, seriously trying to figure out how the Emperor even showed up at this banquet. He couldn't believe it was really him, standing there, being cool. Then he snapped out of it and told his sister they should go back inside. He mentioned that their mom got super worried when she couldn't find her, but Regina? Oh man, she was not having it. She looked at our boy like he was hiding something and told him he needed to explain himself before they went anywhere. She was like, since when had he been hiding those magic skills? Our protagonist scratched his head, acting all awkward, and tried to dodge the question. He said he'd explain later and that right now wasn't a good time. Classic move, bro. So, they walked back into the banquet hall, but the vibe? Yeah, it was way off. People were staring, and the room felt cold. Adrian felt a chill go up his back and wondered what was going on. Then, Regina rushed over to their mom, looking super worried. She called out for her, and their mom, Owen, turned around, surprised to see her. The two of them leaned in close and started whispering. Regina wanted to know what happened, because suddenly everyone was acting weird and giving them dirty looks. Owen shook her head and said she didn't really know. But things seemed to turn icy after a certain gentleman came in. Adrian, always on alert, looked over at the guy she meant. It was Dominic Sullivan. Yeah, that dude with a sharp tongue, who loved to stir the pot. Dominic, standing tall, started throwing shade at Count Heisbert, saying it was disappointing that there were people at the party with no manners and that someone should be handling it better. He went on about how, in high society, people should greet everyone when they arrive. Basically, he was calling out our hero's family for acting like country bumpkins. Count Heisbert tried to play it cool, asking Dominic to be understanding. But he just threw more attitude, saying the Callista family smelled like the countryside. Brutal, man. Regina heard all that trash talk and looked like she was ready to go off on the dude. Her eyes got big, and she started to say something about the etiquette, but Adrian stopped her with a gentle hand on her arm. He was thinking about how sly Dominic was being, using some old rule that nobody followed anymore, just to make them look bad. If they argued back, the crowd would only judge them harder. Our boy figured out that Dominic was totally trying to isolate them on purpose. Then Count Heisbert tried to cut the tension by joking that Dominic sure knew his etiquette. But inside, Adrian was seriously stressed. He thought about how Sullivan owned the biggest bank and basically held power over a ton of noble families, even the really important ones. He realized they were never going to avoid a fight with this guy. But now, at Regina's big debut party, Dominic was pulling out all the stops to make the Callista family look bad. Adrian blamed himself for not thinking about this risk when they got the party invite. Then, just when things were getting awkward, someone from across the room called out, breaking up the tension. It was Lord Chinovis, who shouted for Count Callista. Everybody in the room started whispering, talking about how that was the eldest son of Chinovis, and how his family recently paid off their debt. Duran Chinovis came over, looking super happy, and said he'd been looking for Adrian because he heard he'd be at the party. He wanted to introduce his friends, O'Connor and Patel. They stepped forward and greeted Adrian politely, saying he'd heard a lot about him. Adrian nodded back and said it was nice to meet him, trying to keep things friendly. Suddenly, the whole mood in the room started to change. People were talking again, and some girl who had talked to Regina earlier nervously asked if she wanted to keep their conversation going. Regina was surprised but happy and agreed. Meanwhile, our hero noticed that everything shifted as soon as Lord Chinovis started talking to them. He looked at Chinovis, who gave him a quick wink, like he knew exactly what was going on. Later, out on the balcony, Adrian and Duran stood apart from the party crowd to have a private chat. Duran apologized for acting all friendly so suddenly and explained he just wanted to help since he saw they were in a tough spot. He said this wasn't the first or second time Dominic Sullivan had pulled something like that. Then, our boy let out a sigh and thanked him, saying they avoided a super awkward scene thanks to him. He admitted he didn't realize just how popular Duran was and how easily he could change the mood at the party. But Duran was a humble dude. He rubbed the back of his neck and said it wasn't because of him, but because of his father's reputation. Adrian tilted his head, a little confused, and asked if he meant Count Chinovis. Duran explained his dad used to be really respected everywhere, though people only remembered him as a gambling addict now. He said if it wasn't for Adrian helping their family, he wouldn't even be there at the party. He thanked Adrian again and said he basically saved their family. Now, RMC was a little surprised by how honest Duran was. On the way home, he thought to himself that he didn't help the Chenovis family out of pity or because of anything personal. He just made a quick judgment based on some info from his previous life. Adrian started to realize that if Lord Chenovis hadn't turned out to be a good guy, things today could have gone way worse. He thought the same thing about the incident with the Emperor. A small difference, and both sides could have gotten hurt. Our protagonist started to see that making the future he wanted wasn't just about having money or magic. He was going to need way more information if he wanted to win in this crazy world. Bro, he'd better get ready, because things were only going to get wilder from here. So, now he finally got to go home. After all that craziness at the banquet, he sat down with his mom and Regina, and for once, he decided to tell them a little bit about his secret life. He explained that, for some reason, he had become a mage, and he was even stronger than an archmage. Yeah, he just dropped that like it was no big deal, but our boy couldn't say anything more. He thought to himself that it wasn't because he didn't trust his family, but because he still wasn't strong enough. He really didn't want to pull his family into any kind of dangerous empire drama, especially with all those rumors flying around about rare dragons and stuff. If word spread, he knew things could get ugly, fast. Meanwhile, his mom ran her hand through her hair and let out a tired breath. She said that she always knew Adrian was hiding something, but she honestly couldn't believe he'd become a mage. Regina, still buzzing with energy, jumped in and told their mom it was no joke. She even mentioned that everyone was talking about his crazy magic activation word, and said even the Imperial Sorcerer thought it was strange. Then, Adrian looked right at Regina and told her not to talk to other people about his magic. Regina agreed seriously, saying it was a secret, but then she just couldn't help herself, and asked if the two people always hanging around with Adrian already knew. Our boy hesitated and admitted that, well, it just kind of happened. Regina's eyes went wide and she got all dramatic. She said she couldn't believe his brother hid it from his own family, but told his friends, who he barely even knew. She thought that was just too much. He could only mumble out an apology. Meanwhile, outside the room, Lakia and Asa were eavesdropping behind the door. Lakia sighed and grumbled that he could hear everything. Asa just stood there, looking stunned, and repeated the word friends, like he was still trying to process it. Back in the room, Owen gave Adrian a serious look and told him that he didn't have to share everything, but he should never do anything dangerous. She said his safety always came first. He gave her a soft smile and said he'd make sure they never had to worry, and thanked them for trusting him. Later that night, our protagonist went out into the fresh air and walked over to a small shed next to the house. He thought about his real dream for this new life. It wasn't about being the strongest or getting revenge. He wanted to change the world, but he knew that was a huge dream. He needed to take it slow, one step at a time, and be careful. And he decided to build slowly with room to spare. So, now, before he went into the shed, he made sure no one saw him. As he opened the shed door, a soft light glowed inside. From a window, Lakia and Asa watched him. Asa wondered if Adrian was really just a storage shed and asked what he was always doing over there. Lakia turned away and told Asa to drop it, since it wasn't the first time Adrian had kept secrets. The cat guy pouted and said Lakia was just as curious, and told him to stop with his annoying attitude. Lakia snapped right back, saying Asa was the one who started it. Those two were acting like little kids, honestly. Meanwhile, Regina lay in her bed, blushing hard, and whispered the word lilac into her pillow. Our girl had things on her mind too. Now, Adrian stepped out of the shed under the moonlight, and just like that, everyone went to sleep with their own worries. That was another wild night in the capital. But somewhere else in the city, there was this guy building a tower out of playing cards. His name was Jeprion, and you could see he was concentrating hard, putting one more card on top and whispering to himself to be careful. Then, boom, a sharp voice called his name, and the whole card tower exploded everywhere. This woman across the room told him to stop wasting time and get to work. Jeprion just let out a huge sigh and complained, saying there was no work to do anyway. She told him to go find some work then, but he joked that maybe they should start handing out flyers on the street. He said no, noble in their right mind would come to their information guild, and there were already too many rumors. He told his boss to just give up. She just looked tired and had no comeback. But right then, a voice called from outside, asking if anyone had seen a lost bird, and knocked on the door. Outside the old building, Adrian and Lakia stood there. Adrian looked at the place with some doubt, thinking it looked way worse than he expected. Lakia said it was the right place. At least it had been 5 years ago. The door creaked open, and Jeprian stood there, looking bored, and asked what color the bird was. Adrian told him it was blue. Adrian thought to himself that he had plenty of time and money, but what he really needed was information. That was the one thing he was missing. He totally failed at the banquet, because he just didn't know enough. He remembered Lakia had once mentioned a guild called Lucin, with a guild master named Annabelle. Inside, Adrian finally sat across from Annabelle herself. She had a confident smile and immediately cut him off before he could really introduce himself. She said it was an honor for her guild to have Count Callista visit. Adrian was a little surprised and asked if she really knew who he was. She told him that everyone knew who owned Callista Bank and who helped the Chenevis family, and that he just made his debut in high society. She even said his knight looked familiar and started to wonder out loud who he could be. Then, her face got serious when she saw Asa, who was pretending to be a cat. She picked Asa up and started petting him, all excited because she'd never seen such a big, cute cat before. She said the fur was soft, but Asa was way heavier than he looked. Basically, she called him a chubby boy. Now, about 30 minutes earlier, Asa had thrown a little tantrum, bouncing around and begging to come along. He told our boy he just had to act like a normal cat. Adrian sighed, finally gave in, and told Asa to stop and come with them. Then, he thought Annabelle was pretty impressive, building up this whole guild when she was still young. He felt lucky the guild hadn't figured out who Lakia, or Asa, really were. He even told Asa to chill out and not bite anyone, which was honestly good advice, because that cat boy could be a menace. Then, Annabelle was all smooth in business, still brushing Asa's fur. She pointed out that Adrian was new in the capital, so he probably had very few friends. She asked how he even found her guild, and wondered if it was because of their recent fame. Our boy met her eyes without flinching, and told her that Lucin Guild used to have the best info network in the city, but they messed with someone's collection, so that person hit back hard. The guild almost fell apart, and now, most nobles avoided them. This dude was not playing around, he just laid it all out. Annabelle paused, then Adrian's added that her question was just testing if he knew the truth. Then, her eyes went sharp, but she gave a tiny grin. She admitted everyone knew Lord Angus was trying to isolate their guild, but no one knew it was because of a collection. She wanted to know where Adrian got that kind of secret info. Adrian just let out a soft sigh, and told her that finding out was her job, not his. Oof, our hero knew how to make a point. Annabelle's smile turned a little dangerous, and she carefully set Asa down. Her brain was definitely working overtime. She tied her hair back and crossed the room, suddenly much more formal. She admitted she'd underestimated Adrian, and said that building a real business relationship had to start with both sides equal. She wanted to know what kind of info he was after. Then, our boy leaned in and explained that, since he'd grown up far away from the capital, he didn't know anything about the politics or the people in charge. He wanted to make an exclusive contract with the Lucin Guild. Annabelle was interested and repeated his words, wanting to be sure. So, our protagonist said he wanted the guild to gather and organize info on all the main noble families and big merchant groups in the capital. He also wanted reports on any big news or trends. To sweeten the deal, he promised to pay for every bit of info and even take care of the guild's bills. I mean, dude was ready to back the whole place. Now, she looked over the contract that Lakia handed her. After a moment, she gave a short nod and said, okay. She already knew he was aware of the guild's money problems, so she had no reason to say no. But our hero thought to himself that, normally, a place like this wouldn't want to work with a random noble, but with their cash flow tanking, they were desperate. Lucky for him, right? Just then set the papers aside and said, as a little sample, they should talk about the 3 most powerful families in the city. Adrian was surprised. 3? Not 2? She explained the first 2 were super obvious, Townsend and McCarthy. Those 2 ducal families basically ran the empire from the shadows and had been fighting for ages. She said the emperor was just an empty puppet and those families were eating the empire alive. Yikes. She was not holding back. Adrian thought to himself that she was seriously harsh. Annabelle then talked about the 3rd family, the Krauser, Marquesit. This family had been around for over 400 years, but almost nobody knew what they actually did. The current head, Chai von Krauser, hadn't been seen in public for more than a decade, and nobody knew if he was a young guy or an old man. Both ducal families wanted Krauser on their side, but the Marquise had stayed neutral. Our MC blinked in surprise. He didn't even know this Krauser family from his past life, and Lakia didn't either. That meant they never got involved in any big scandals or power plays. Still, something about the whole thing felt weird to him. Then, Adrian told her to look into the Krausers separately and handed her a fat pouch of coins for the info today. Her eyes lit up as she'd just seen her first rainbow. She jumped up to Jeprion and shouted about the money and said they could finally eat meat again. Jeprion groaned from the side, complaining that she was ruining their serious image by acting like a little kid. Honestly, the vibe in this guild was chaos. After leaving the guild, Lakia shot a look at Adrian and pointed out that Annabelle had only brought up the Krausers to get him to order an investigation. He wondered why Adrian fell for that kind of trick. Meanwhile, our MC just shrugged it off. He said since both ducal families were watching Krauser, there was no harm in learning more. He even teased that Lakia didn't know anything about them either. Lakia grumbled, but couldn't argue. Later, back at the Callista house, Alman came running in, out of breath, telling Adrian that a guest was waiting in the reception room. Adrian was confused. Nobody was supposed to visit. Inside, a man sat with scary calm. Count Rumbly Ivan, the Imperial Grand Archmage. Our poor guy's heart almost stopped. He remembered using super powerful magic right in front of this dude, and now he was terrified his secret was out for real. He wondered if he was about to be exposed. Then, Ivan called him over, and Adrian straightened up, trying not to freak out. He told him he probably already knew why he was visiting. Adrian swallowed hard and tried to answer, but before he could even get the words out, Ivan suddenly burst out in a loud, desperate voice, begging Adrian to take him as a disciple. No joke, our boy was so stunned he just stared in total shock, wondering if he'd heard that right. Was this famous old mage really asking Adrian to be his teacher? Now, Ivan stood tall, smiling, and asked Adrian to call him by his first name. Super casual. Our boy panicked inside, saying they definitely weren't that close. Ivan just puffed out his chest even more, insisting that he wanted him to speak comfortably to him now, since he was his master. Then, our MC shook his head, thinking this was way too much. He told Ivan more seriously that he just couldn't do it. Ivan was older and a one-of-a-kind archmage. How could Adrian possibly teach him? There were rules for this kind of thing, and even the law. But he suddenly got super intense. He was not playing around. He told everyone that in magic, there were no rules about age, rank, or power. He said only skill mattered, and that mages should always try to reach higher. He also said the strongest mage always rose to the top. Then, out of nowhere, he said that Count Callista must be his master. Our poor guy just stared at him with his mouth open. He tried to say that his magic really was not better than Ivan's. But Ivan acted like that was impossible. He reminded Adrian that he saw him use sixth circle magic, Mirage, just by saying the spell's name. But our boy kept his cool. He told Ivan that it was only third circle invisibility magic, nothing crazy. Ivan looked like someone had just told him the sky was green or something. He said that he definitely heard Adrian say, Mirage. Now, our hero tried to play it off, saying Ivan must have misheard. He asked how he could ever use magic that strong. Ivan was not buying it though. He said that both he and the Emperor heard it. So, was Adrian saying they both made the same mistake? Our hero started to sweat. Ivan just had to bring up the Emperor, huh? Now Adrian was really nervous. Suddenly, Lakia burst in like he owned the place, asking if Adrian had met the Emperor. Adrian nearly jumped out of his seat. He realized Lakia still did not know about everything that happened. Then, Ivan turned and gave Lakia a death glare for interrupting, saying a guard knight had no right to jump into the conversation. But Adrian spoke up right away. He explained that Lakia was not just a guard, he was a close friend, and he wanted him there even if it was rude. Now, Ivan relaxed a bit and said if that was what Count Callista wanted, it was fine. Our hero thanked him, and Lakia did a polite bow. Everyone sat down again, and Adrian explained the whole meeting the Emperor story to Lakia. But Lakia's reaction? This dude was chill as ever. He just said so. That happened. Adrian was shocked, thinking him would be mad about Adrian accidentally attacking the Emperor. But Lakia just seemed interested in how the Emperor was doing. Even weirder, Ivan did not recognize him at all. He just said that the Emperor sent him his best regards. But after that, Ivan started squinting at Lakia, like he was trying to remember something, and wondered if they had met before. Well, it might be because our hero used the fourth circle illusion on him. But he confused why Ivan, because a count who's reached the fifth circle should have been able to detect it. But even Ivan with Lakia in the same room, the mage showed no sign of knowing the real Lakia. Just then, Lakia just turned to Ivan and asked if he was really asking for Adrian's magic lessons. Ivan said yes, totally serious. Lakia then looked at Adrian and said he thought it was a good idea. Ivan lit up like a kid getting candy and said, "See, he knew it was a good idea." He kept going, saying, everyone already knew Adrian's magic was awesome, and even the Emperor knew it too. Now, Ivan was super hyped and clapped his hands, saying, yes, finally someone understood. Then Lakia started talking strategy, saying, if Adrian helped the Imperial Grand Mage, that would also help the Emperor. Maybe, someday, the Emperor would even reward Adrian, which would be great for their future. And it was good for magic too. Now, Adrian realized what was happening. Lakia was totally using him to get closer to the Emperor. Our MC just sat there, overwhelmed. But eventually, he nodded and said he would help Ivan as much as he could. Ivan was so happy he almost started dancing, but Adrian made it super clear. This was not a real master and disciple thing. He would only offer advice, and Ivan had to promise not to tell anyone about him. Ivan agreed right away. Then, our hero told him not to use any fancy titles or honorifics either, and Ivan just laughed and said, okay. Our protagonist thought to himself that Ivan, the only fifth circle mage in the Empire, was supposed to be over 40, even if he looked really young. He knew he probably could not hide all his secrets from someone like Ivan forever, but maybe, like Lakia said, it was smart to make this connection now. So, after all that, the three of them walked out into the hall and ran into Regina. Adrian greeted her and told her to come out. Regina saw Ivan and bowed super respectfully, calling him their most valuable guest. Now, Ivan seemed confused for a second, then remembered something. He pulled a sealed letter out of his coat and handed it to Regina, saying it was from His Majesty, the Emperor. Both Adrian and Regina just froze. Ivan laughed awkwardly and admitted he actually came to deliver the letter, but got a little distracted. Yeah, our hero could not believe it. He thought Ivan had completely forgotten about the important letter. What a mess. Then, Regina turned to Adrian, looking panicked, and asked if she should let him read the letter first. But our hero shook his head, saying that was impossible. It was the Emperor's letter, meant for her. And nobody else could read it, even her family. She had to open and reply herself. Her face turned bright red. Oh boy, somebody had a crush. Meanwhile, back at the Imperial Palace, Ivan was in the Emperor's office grinning. He told the Emperor that he had decided to get magic teachings from Count Callista, just like that. The Emperor just stared and asked for the letter. Ivan finally remembered and said he had already received a reply too. He remembered how Ivan had begged to deliver the letter himself and thought that Ivan's real goal all along was Count Callista. Yeah, the Emperor was not fooled. Later, Regina sat by herself and opened the letter. The Emperor had written that he left the banquet quickly and could not say goodbye, and hoped she got home safe. He wrote that he came to the banquet after hearing the Callista family would be there, especially wanting to meet the person who started a bank for commoners, but he ended up only focusing on Count Callista. Still, he realized Regina had a wise and good heart, and he really enjoyed their short talk. At the end, he asked if she would like to be his friend and write letters back and forth. Whoa, our girl Regina just got a royal pen pal offer. This was getting wild. Her face went so red it looked like she might explode. She slapped a hand over her mouth, jumped up from her seat, turned away, then spun right back around, looking half ready to run for her life. She peeked out, only showing half her face, and asked what the hell she was supposed to do now. She called out to Ivan, asking if maybe she could write her reply to the letter. Right then, Ivan was all smiles, telling her to go ahead and take her time with it. He said he would have a chat with his master. Wait, no, with Count Callista. Yeah, Ivan was still riding that high from earlier. So, now she sat down at the table, looking super serious, and started putting all her energy into writing a reply for the Emperor. A bit later, the Emperor got Regina's response and read it to himself. And now, the Emperor's read her letter. She wrote that she wanted to apologize again for her mistakes at the last banquet and for what her brother did. Even though the whole thing had been a mess, she said it was nice remembering the scent of lavender on the wind that night. That memory, she wrote, stayed bright in her heart. She told him if he would let her exchange letters with him and remember that fragrance again, it would be a huge honor and joy. She asked if she could wait for his reply. Bro. The Emperor's face went just as red as Regina's had. He quietly said her name and then started talking to himself about how someone like him would probably have to marry some high-ranking princess from another country sooner or later. He thought that he would probably be a puppet all his life, unable to do anything his own way. But he figured maybe it would be okay to at least swap stories with her for now. Not long after, another letter from the Emperor made it all the way to the Callista estate. Adrian watched the whole thing in silence, thinking the vibe here was getting a little weird. He started wondering if just leaving things like this was actually the right call. He tried to remember what kind of life the Emperor had in his old life, but honestly, there was nothing special to remember. Power was really always with the big ducal families, Townsend and McCarthy. The Emperor was just a figurehead, not a real king. Those two houses always picked out some foreign princess for him to marry when the time was right. The only thing our boy could remember about the Emperor was that marriage ceremony. He let out a sigh and thought to himself that he was just the guy who opened the door for change. It was up to them now to change their own lives. Time moved on, and suddenly, Callista Bank was the hottest thing in the capital. Among the commoners, opening a Callista account was basically a trend. Like, if you didn't have one, were you even living? Soon, almost everyone in the city had their own account there. One day, in the bank's meeting room, Claude was giving Adrian a report. He said they were about to hit their monthly goal for new accounts, so they'd keep running their lottery event until the end of the month. He said, based on account numbers, they were nearly as big as the main branch of Sullivan Bank now. Even people from outside the capital were coming in, because of all the rumors. But, he admitted, figuring out how much money these newbies actually had was kind of tricky. That got Adrian hyped. His eyes got all sparkly, and he joked that, hey, maybe it was time to open more branches. But Claude backed off real quick, saying that might be a problem, then apologized for even bringing it up. Our MC just smiled calm as ever, and told Claude he could say whatever was on his mind. So Claude explained, a bit nervous, that most customers at Callista Bank were commoners, which meant their accounts were small. Even with tons of customers, the total money wasn't huge. Right now, the cash in and out was barely balanced. If they opened too many branches or gave out too many loans, they might actually run out of money. Our boy kept that smile, just listening. Claude started wondering why his boss looked so happy about all this. Then Adrian said Claude had nailed it. He understood the situation perfectly. And then, he brought up something totally out of left field. He said he was thinking about starting that one business idea Claude had mentioned before. Claude froze, totally shocked. He said that idea was just a rough thought, and they scrapped it because it was basically impossible to pull off. But our hero just told him not to worry. He'd handle all the problems. Meanwhile, down at the port, some guy was counting boxes. He counted all 50 crates of dye and said it would cost 30 gold. The merchant he was working with, a Huffman Trading Company guy, handed him a piece of paper. The guy looked at it like it was a joke and asked what it was, since it wasn't the usual banknote. The merchant explained it was a check from Callista Bank. He said if the guy took it there, they'd hand over 30 gold. Just like that. The guy looked suspicious. He said, so, this scrap of paper from the bank that takes even commoners was worth 30 gold? Why do it this way? The merchant told him he'd already put 30 gold in the bank, and carrying money around was just heavy. The guy had to admit, gold was a pain to carry, but he still didn't trust it. He said he wanted cash, like always. But the merchant just shrugged. He said he didn't carry cash anymore. But if the guy didn't trust him, they could just go to the bank and get the money together. So that's what they did. At Callista Bank, the teller double-checked the paper, made sure the number and signature were good, then handed over a fat pouch of 30 gold. The merchant was looking pretty smug at that point. He told the other guy, see, it worked just fine. And that was it, the start of something new in the city. All thanks to some pieces of paper and a bank that even the little guys could use. Pretty wild, right? Now, he looking at the coins like they were magic or something. He started thinking that this was almost too good to be true. Carrying gold was always a pain. Super heavy, super risky. Big merchant guilds usually had to spend a ton of money hiring bodyguards just to move their cash around. Even then, things went wrong and money got lost. But now, with this check thing, he could basically carry a small piece of paper in his pocket that was worth way more than a bag of gold. After being in the business for so long, he realized pretty fast that Callista Bank's checks were about to take over everywhere. Meanwhile, over at the fancy Sullivan estate, a servant was giving Dominic Sullivan some bad news. He told Dominic that the Huffman merchants had started working with Callista Bank, too. Dominic was pissed. He slammed his desk and basically shouted that those Huffman guys owed everything to Sullivan Bank. He asked how they could betray him like that. The servant tried not to sound too scared, and said that this new check was catching on with other merchants. Every time someone brought a check to Callista Bank, they usually got convinced to open an account, too. And now, since all the big merchant guilds were using the bank, even the nobles, who had just been watching before, were starting to come by. The boss was shaking with anger. He said that Callista Bank was supposed to be for desperate people and commoners. He blamed all of this on one stupid piece of paper. He grabbed one of the checks and looked at it closely, scratching the surface and muttering about the bank seal, serial number, signature, and amount. He noticed the paper was made with silk threads and had a special pattern, so it was tough and wouldn't get ruined by water. But Dominic just sneered. He said they could totally make the same kind of check at Sullivan Bank. He told his servant to get ready. They were going to start handing out their own checks. He figured merchants would rather stick with a bank they already trusted. Anyway, the servant got a little nervous and said that maybe it wasn't the most moral move. He cut her off fast, asking what was so holy about selling fancy paper with numbers on it. He said he had basically invented banking in this whole empire, so he didn't care about any of that. Then the servant bowed and said she'd do it. Now, Dominic threw the check aside and leaned back, already thinking about his next move. He figured Callista Bank probably had a lot of money now, and soon, they'd want to open more branches. He wanted the servant to plant a Sullivan spy there as soon as Callista started hiring. He wanted to know every trick those brats were planning and said to report anything strange right away. Then the servant said she understood. But Dominic just scowled, thinking that banking was turning into a nightmare. He grumbled about all the new pests, and even mentioned he had to deal with crazy guys like Bowen, too. Back at Adrian's place, our boy was checking a new report from Annabelle. He pointed out that Viscount Bowen had a weird reputation and asked her to explain. She didn't answer right away. Adrian looked up, thinking she was acting odd. She snapped back and apologized, saying she was just distracted for a second. Well, she was secretly thinking that Adrian was insane. He had asked her for information on every noble in the empire, read hundreds of pages in one go, and then started ranking nobles by importance, all by himself. She wondered if this dude was really only 18. Then she cleared her throat and explained that Bowen had a unique hobby. He just liked collecting women's clothes. He didn't wear them and wasn't a womanizer. He just liked having them. She added that Bowen always picked up interesting clothes while traveling, and those outfits somehow became high society trends right after. There was even a joke that if you wanted the hottest dress, you should just ask what was in Bowen's closet. Now, our hero got interested. He figured Bowen must have a great sense for fashion and said maybe this could become a business. Annabelle added that Bowen had actually tried to open a salon for years, but Sullivan Bank always turned him down for a loan. Adrian was curious and asked why. She explained that nobles thought salons were low-class businesses, so it was basically off-limits. Adrian told Claude, his assistant, to file this Bowen info in the second bundle on the right. Poitier said he would do it. Annabelle realized, kind of shocked, that Adrian had just put this salon thing into his top investment group. Then, our hero thought to himself that he was finally starting to get how noble society worked. He realized that, just like commoners, nobles were trapped by their own rules and pride. He thought back to how he had let too many talented people die in his last life. This time, he promised himself he would focus on changing the future, even if he couldn't fix everything. A bit later, he was walking down the hall with Alman. He asked how things were in their home territory. Alman said things were actually going really well. More people were moving in, and this year's harvest was supposed to be the best ever. Adrian seemed super relieved and said he could finally relax about the fief. But deep down, our MC was thinking that maybe changing the future for the better could also bring some disasters he hadn't planned for. Soon, Callista Bank's checks were everywhere, and merchants said it was the best new thing ever. But of course, Sullivan Bank jumped on the bandwagon and started copying them with their own checks. At the crowded market, one customer handed a Sullivan Bank check to a vendor. The vendor was surprised and asked if Sullivan did checks now too. The customer seemed proud and said yes, and that Sullivan had actually been doing it for a while now. He said he was sticking with Sullivan from now on because they had more branches and a better reputation. The vendor agreed, saying it was annoying to have to go all the way to Callista's main branch before. Back at Callista Bank, Claude showed up to give Adrian some bad news. He said Callista's share of the check market was dropping way faster than they expected. All the big merchant guilds were now moving their huge sums through Sullivan Bank, since it seemed safer and more stable. But our boy stayed cool. He said it was totally normal for a copycat to show up after something was proven to work. He pointed out that Callista Bank had already met their first goal, getting more customers. What really mattered now, he said, was the special technology only Callista Bank had. He was sure people would notice the difference soon enough. Then he changed the subject and said there was a customer waiting who wanted to meet with him that day. Now, when our hero walked into the meeting room, he didn't expect to see a grown man on one knee, holding up a giant bouquet like he was proposing marriage. But that's exactly what he got. The guy gasped like a drama king and announced that Adrian must be Count Callista. Adrian knew right away that he had to be Viscount Bowen, the nobleman everyone called weird for his obsession with collecting women's clothes. People said he was a trendsetter in fashion and always ahead by a mile. Honestly, our boy used to wonder if Bowen was creepy or something, but meeting him in person, he could tell instantly that this man just loved fashion, like, worshipped it. Nothing sketchy about him. Now, Bowen took a tiny sip of tea, then slammed the cup down in the most dramatic way possible and began to talk. He admitted he'd been totally shocked when he got a letter from Callista Bank. At first, he thought it was some kind of scam. He never dreamed someone would actually give him a loan. Forget that. He never expected a whole investment offer. Our MC kept it cool and confirmed it was real. He explained that Bowen would run the salon himself, and there was no need to repay the investment. All Callista Bank wanted was a share of the profits. Viscount Bowen completely lost it. He straight up started tearing up. He said that everyone in high society had laughed at him for his collection, acting like he was some kind of freak. He couldn't even talk about opening a salon without getting roasted. But now, someone finally took him seriously. Meanwhile, Claude, who had been standing quietly, moved the bouquet over to a vase. Adrian thanked him, but Bowen interrupted fast. He said there was no need to put water in it. That got Adrian and Poitier both looking at each other, totally confused. Bowen explained that the bouquet was made of artificial flowers. He started bragging about meeting an artist who could make fake flowers look exactly like the real thing. So, of course, he had hired the person on the spot. Adrian and Claude were stunned. Our boy even reached out and touched a petal. He couldn't believe it. Bowen loved the reaction. He said unless you actually touched them, you couldn't tell. And the whole process was super detailed. The only downside was the cost. Just one flower cost 2 silver. Then, Claude leaned in close and whispered to Adrian, looking a bit panicked. Maybe, just maybe, Adrian had lost his mind with money, because who the hell would pay 2 silvers for a fake flower? But our MC was dead serious inside. He knew that, in the future, high-quality fake flowers like these would blow up among noblewomen. People would use them for hat decorations, accessories, even on dresses, and they'd sell for gold coins. Actual gold coins, bro, and there still wouldn't be enough for everyone who wanted them. They would even end up mixed with real jewels, as luxury items. He remembered this was one of the things that wrecked Callista's finances in his past life, and the trend wouldn't even start for a few more years. He figured if only the flowers had a scent, they'd be totally perfect. He turned to Bowen and said this was a seriously great business idea. He wanted to start with these artificial flowers as the first product for the salon. That night, someone brought one of the flowers to Regina. She was totally blown away. She couldn't believe it was fake, especially since it even smelled nice. She guessed they just spritzed some perfume on it. She checked the petals up close and guessed it was made of thin silk. Meanwhile, Lakia and Asa were hanging out near a window, looking bored. Asa complained that he was dying from boredom and that Adrian was ignoring him big time. Ever since they got to the capital, Adrian was stuck doing bank stuff or hanging out with the Information Guild. Lakia pointed out that Adrian came here for business anyway, but Asa kept whining that he didn't even eat meals with him anymore. Then both of them froze. Lakia blinked, and Asa narrowed his eyes. They turned around and saw the barn, and then they realized something was off. Every night, some crazy, strong magic was leaking out of the barn. A few minutes later, Adrian stepped out of the shed and found both of them waiting for him. Then, the cat guy jumped up and started grilling him, asking what the hell he was doing in there every night and demanding to know what he was hiding. Lakia was calmer and asked if Adrian was sure it wasn't dangerous. Now, our hero was totally caught off guard. He stammered, but Lakia turned away, saying it was probably something he couldn't talk about anyway. Asa called Lakia a traitor for not pushing harder and asked together. Then, Adrian stopped and offered that, if they wanted, they could come inside. He was just about to call them, anyway. Inside the shed, they saw a glowing magic circle on the floor, symbols floating around in the air. Adrian explained he'd been working on this in his free time and just finished it today. He should have put up a stronger magic blocking barrier, but he didn't expect the magic to leak out. Asa just stared in awe, and Lakia's voice got serious. He asked what this was, because he could feel a crazy, huge amount of magic. Then, our hero told them it was a warp gate. The cat guy tilted his head, not getting it. A warp what? Lakia, on the other hand, just froze. He said there was no way, because a warp gate was 7th circle magic. Almost nobody had ever pulled that off, even before the decline of magic. He started wondering who the hell Adrian really was. Now, our protagonist looked at his friends and finally said he was the successor to the gold dragon, Seifrid. Lakia and Asa were both totally shocked. Then, Adrian thought to himself that these two had figured out his power pretty early on, but they'd trusted him just because he'd saved them. He could have kept this secret forever, but he wanted to repay their trust at least a little. He told them this was how he got his magical abilities, though he still couldn't say anything about his past life or regression to anyone. Lakia just held his head, looking like his brain was about to explode. He said it made sense to hide something that big. He still couldn't believe Adrian had pulled it off. Asa's eyes went huge, and he realized the cave from back then must have been the gold dragon's lair he'd only ever heard about in stories. Man, our boy sure knew how to keep things interesting. Now, he let out a laugh and told his friends that from now on, he'd be warping back and forth between Callista and the capital, using his new magic circle. He said he couldn't keep making everyone freak out every time he disappeared, so he asked if they wanted to try it together. So, the squad lined up and stepped right into the warp gate. Asa just stood there, stunned by the smell, and said it felt just like Callista Castle. Adrian nodded. He thought it was kind of wild, too, since this was his first time actually using 7th Circle magic. It had taken him a while to get the teleport locations lined up right. Then, Lakia looked around and realized they were in the storage room, the same one Adrian had randomly locked up before they all left for the capital. He guessed that meant this whole plan started way back then. Our hero admitted he'd been too anxious about leaving the territory without a backup. Lakia glanced around and said it was super useful, but checked if this warp gate could only go from the capital's barn to this room. Adrian said yeah, that's how it worked. Warp gates could only jump between 2 fixed places. After several months, he returned to the Callista territory. Then, our hero peeked outside, and his face went dark. Dude, home was not looking good. It was straight up chaos out there. Heavy rain was pouring when our MC, Lakia, and Asa walked out into the mess. They found one of the servants hustling past and Adrian jumped in, wanting answers. He asked William what the hell was happening. Meanwhile, William looked ready to pass out from shock, since he thought Adrian was still in the capital. Adrian cut him off, saying they could talk about that later, and he needed the full story right now. Then, William explained, there'd been a massive flood. The river couldn't handle a week of non-stop rain, and that morning, it finally spilled over. The main thing was getting everyone out of the danger zones. He asked if Adrian was okay, since the roads were all flooded. That hit our boy hard. He remembered that every year, Callista got hit with weeks of rain, but the river had never flooded this badly. He started wondering why the future was changing on him. William said the Western Plains took the worst damage. That made Adrian freeze. He knew Callista was never rich, since the East was all mountains, and the West used to be swamp. Adrian was the one who spent years fixing up that land, draining the swamp and mixing in sand to make it good for farming. That new farmland was supposed to be Callista's ticket to success, because, as word spread about the safety and quality of life in Callista, more and more people began migrating here from other regions. Then he remembered the last time when he checked Callista's conditions with Alman. Alman said everything is climbing without major issues, so he concluded that the harvest in this year would be the best. So, since that, he can worry less about Callista. But William hit them with the bad news. Almost all of that reclaimed land was underwater. At least most of it was just crops, not houses. Lakia asked fast if everyone got out in time. William said most people were evacuated that morning, and the knights were still checking for anyone left behind. Meanwhile, our hero just stood there, crushed. He thought it was all his mistake for filling in the swamps, which used to soak up the rain. Asa interrupted, saying he was being ridiculous. No one can control a flood. Lakia backed him up, saying no one could have seen this coming, after years of nothing happening. But our MC couldn't shake the guilt. He thought none of this had happened before, and that maybe he'd ruined everything by trying to play the hero with his future knowledge. He started freaking out, wondering if all his choices were just bad mistakes. He starts wondering, what if the things he's doing to change the future are actually causing irreversible consequence? Suddenly, Lakia grabbed him and told him to snap out of it. He said Adrian was the Lord here, so he needed to stop blaming himself and do his job. Find a solution first. Our boy blinked, like someone just threw cold water on his face. He asked William what the staff were doing right now. William said they were hauling stuff from the underground warehouse, just like Adrian once ordered. Then, our hero told him to stop that immediately and put everyone on evacuation duty. He told Lakia they should help the knights with the rescue work. Lakia agreed. Asa jumped in too, saying he wasn't about to get left behind. Now, Adrian stood up straighter, remembering that the most important thing was saving Callista. He asked if there were any casualties. William said no. Thanks to road repairs, everyone got out fast. Then, our boy asked about the west side. William said Sir Philip was over there now. and our boy commanded to make sure people near the river and hills got out, since the ground might collapse. Before anyone could say more, Sir Philip himself showed up, looking like a drowned rat on horseback. He said there was big trouble. The bridge downstream was gone. Then, Adrian's face got even darker. He knew there were about 20 families on the other side. He bombarded Philip with questions. Was the bridge totally destroyed? When did it collapse? Was anyone stuck there? Philip said they weren't sure. It was already gone when they got there. Just then, Lakia pointed out a woman across the river, waving and yelling for help. She was crying, saying there was a very sick patient in their village and no way to cross. She begged for help. The knights started whispering about taking a dangerous detour upstream or building some makeshift bridge, but it all sounded hopeless. Then, our boy jumped off his horse and picked up a rock, trying out a levitation spell. He mumbled that flying spells were too shaky in this crazy weather. He told Lakia to keep the knights quiet. Then he nodded and did his thing. Meanwhile, Adrian stepped up to the busted bridge. Some of the knights got nervous and begged him to stop, but our boy wasn't going to chicken out now. He said this was the kind of moment where he couldn't run away, because he was the successor to the gold dragon, Cyfrid. He started casting kinesis magic. Suddenly, boulders started floating up, making all the knights lose their minds. They whispered, wondering what crazy magic this even was. He kept going, casting feathering magic. Lakia noticed that he was using multiple spells at the same time, something most mages couldn't even dream of. But Adrian didn't stop there. He started layering more spells. Binding, restore, vacuum. He said a simple fix wouldn't cut it, so he'd just combine a bunch of smaller spells with really good control. At the end, he threw in an adamant spell. Suddenly, the rocks snapped together, locked in, and hardened. Just like that, the bridge was back. The knights were speechless. One of them muttered that the bridge was actually, for real, fixed. Adrian turned around all calm, telling everyone to go save the families now. It was safe to cross. Everyone jumped into action. Lakia, though, was clenching his teeth, thinking that even if these were his own knights, using magic this openly was super risky. Adrian was really pushing his luck with all this wild magic. So, our hero shot Lakia, a tired smile. And Lakia immediately got what he meant. With a look, he told the knights to gather up and listen. He ordered everyone to keep their mouths shut about the magic they'd just seen, and to focus on serving lives instead. He promised there'd be an official announcement later, but only after everything was under control. The knights all agreed right away, but our hero was thinking to himself that this was just like Adrian, always playing his cards straight, doing good things without any hesitation, even when it made his life harder. Honestly, the guy was kind of a fool, but in a weirdly awesome way. Now that the bridge was fixed, everyone rushed to rescue the people who'd been trapped by the flood. Adrian and the knights made it across and hurried straight to the village, where the flood victims were all gathered together. Then, our boy asked if everyone was all right, sounding pretty anxious. The villagers quickly pointed him to a camp where the injured people were being treated under some sad-looking tents. It was clear there were more hurt folks than he'd expected. He wondered if some buildings had collapsed, or if people got swept away, running from the flood. He thought to himself that if they'd shown up any later, things could have been way worse. Then one of the villagers came up, looking totally confused, and asked how the hell Adrian had crossed the river so fast when the bridge was supposed to be destroyed. But the woman who'd called for help earlier jumped in and smoothly covered for him, saying she must have made a mistake, that the bridge was actually fine. One of the knights even played along, teasing her by asking where her head was at, since they'd just walked right across it. The suspicious villager scratched his head, still not sure, but finally laughed it off and said he was just happy the Lord made it across, safely. Suddenly, an older villager stepped forward and bowed, telling our MC that most of them were outsiders and really thought they'd been abandoned. For Adrian to come save them himself was a huge honor. That one definitely caught our MC off guard. He was not ready for that level of respect. Later, when the sun finally started showing up and the worst was over, Lakia gathered up the knights and the woman from earlier. He announced that the flood relief was done, but before splitting up, he had to say something important. He reminded everyone that the crazy magic they'd seen today was a big secret. He asked if they could imagine what powerful nobles would do if they heard about a teenage count with insane magic skills and zero backup, except his own spells. He made it clear he'd do anything to take that kind of power for himself, and those other nobles definitely would too. That's why nobody could talk about the magic. So, now, the knights looked a little freaked out, but they got it now, and agreed to stay quiet. Lakia apologized to the lady for dragging her into this mess, but she just bowed quickly, and said she was honestly glad to keep the secret. She didn't know much about magic, but she could tell that saving them like that was a big deal, and repaying Adrian's kindness by keeping quiet was an easy choice. Then Lakia finally let out a breath. That was one problem solved. Later, he found Adrian in his office, totally wiped out and hunched over a pile of papers. Our hero hadn't even taken a break. Then, Lakia asked him why he wasn't resting after a night like that. Adrian said he was reviewing everything about the Western Reclamation Project. The whole reason for the flood in the first place. Lakia couldn't believe he was still stressing about that. He explained that Callista's west side was lower, and all the rainwater from the mountains ended up there, turning the place into swamps. He admitted that forcing the project in that spot had been careless, and now he was already thinking of building a dam upstream to prevent this from happening again. He planned to find a civil engineer as soon as the sun came up. But Lakia stopped him, putting a firm hand on his shoulder. He told him it was great that he wanted to take care of everything, but he didn't have to do it alone. He had people around him, and he needed to trust them and let them help. Then, our hero thanked him, but said he still felt bad. He pointed out that Lakia was only supposed to stay in Callista for 2 more years. The truth was, Lakia had been in hiding here ever since Adrian promised his name would be cleared after 5 years. All this time, Lakia had been living under an alias, serving as Adrian's escort knight and even running the knights, like a captain, way below what someone like him deserved. Now, Adrian seemed embarrassed about it and suddenly pulled out a sword from beside the desk. He offered it to Lakia, who looked super confused at first. Our boy said he didn't like seeing him carry something so worn out. He'd planned to give it as a proper gift after revealing his magic, but the timing never worked out. He wanted to make it some big, dramatic deal, but now this had to do. Then, Lakia thanked him, but said an escort knight should really carry a standard weapon, nothing too fancy. Adrian just smirked and told him the sword was made from a dragon's bone. His buddy went stiff, totally shocked. Adrian explained it was an alloy called Oliphant Mithril mixed with dragon bone, and only a dragon could make something strong enough to handle a swordmaster's power. He'd found it in Seyfried's lair and thought Lakia deserved it most. Lakia stared, gripping the sword, and then just lost it. He grabbed him by the shoulders and started shaking him, basically yelling to know if Adrian had any sense at all. There were gifts you gave, and gifts you absolutely did not. Dragon stuff was just too valuable. But Adrian only smiled and said it was nothing compared to everything Lakia had done for him. Lakia, voice softer now, asked about Asa. Didn't Adrian trust Asa, too? He explained that Asa, the cat guy, was never meant to stay with humans forever. He told him that everyone knew this, and Asa would go back to his own people someday. Basically, our MC figured Asa would leave when the time came. Now, the knight just stared at the dragonbone sword in his hand and wondered if Adrian really believed all his friends would just walk away one day. He thought it was wild that, even if Adrian felt this way, he still shared his biggest secrets and handed out crazy expensive gifts like it was nothing. Bro, that's trust issues and loyalty, all mixed into one. Suddenly, a knight came crashing in yelling that there was an intruder in the castle, and the guy was messing with Adrian's friend. Both Adrian and Lakia jumped up at the same time, totally panicked, yelling Asa's name. They bolted out to the hall, where things were already going wild. The knights had their swords out and had surrounded a stranger and Asa. Asa was staring at the new guy, like he had just seen a ghost. He stammered out that this was Ryuji. Adrian and Lakia arrived and immediately asked if Asa was okay and tried to figure out what the hell was going on. Asa, looking freaked, told everyone to stay back. Then the stranger just dropped to one knee, super dramatic, and shouted that he had come to escort Lord Asa. Yeah, Lord Asa. You could have heard a pin drop after that one. The knights were just as confused as everyone else. Not long after, the group moved inside for a more civil talk. Adrian sat face to face with Ryuji, the cat person warrior. He was all polite but made it clear he wanted answers. He apologized if his knights had been rude, but said that was only because they didn't know who Ryuji was. Then he asked if this dude was really Ryuji. Ryuji answered with all that cat person pride, saying he was a warrior from Asa's homeland, Myoin tribe. He thanked Adrian for taking care of Lord Asa, but then got right to the point. He said, Asa shouldn't be among humans anymore, and he was here to personally take him home. Our hero let out a long sigh, thinking to himself that he'd always known this moment would come. After all, Asa was just visiting, not planning to stay forever. But before Adrian could get any words out, Asa suddenly leapt up, totally losing it. He shouted that he wasn't going back, voice shaking with fear and stubbornness. Ryuji was floored. He tried reasoning with Asa, asking if he really wanted to keep living with humans, and reminding him that humans couldn't be trusted. His voice was half worried, half scolding. But Asa wasn't having any of it. He cut Ryuji off, yelling, "No," even louder, and then started to look straight up scared. He admitted he couldn't go back because there was someone there he was terrified of. Adrian watched Asa for a second, then calmly told him that, yeah, the cat people had a right to be suspicious, but Asa was his friend. As long as Asa wanted to stay, our boy would have his back, no matter what. That totally stunned Asa. He jumped behind Adrian for cover and shouted at Ryuji that our MC was his first real friend among humans. He said if Ryuji didn't trust Adrian, then he was basically saying he didn't trust Asa either. Then, Ryuji started to stutter, still calling Asa, "My lord," but Asa was on a roll. He made fun of the idea that everyone at home missed him, asking when anyone there had ever cared about how he was doing. Now, Lakia, hanging out in the background, mumbled to himself, wondering what Asa's deal was. Like, who was this little guy really, to cause such a stir? After a long, awkward pause, Ryuji finally gave in. He said that if Asa was this serious about staying, he wouldn't force him to leave. But he also announced that, as Asa's retainer, he couldn't just abandon his lord in some strange land. So, wherever Asa stayed, he'd stay, too. That left the room totally silent. Adrian just blinked, clearly not ready for that answer, and then awkwardly said, "Fine. If Ryuji was Asa's companion, he could stay with them." But Asa quickly told Ryuji to stop being so formal, since they were now all friends. And just like that, he became part of the squad. After all that drama, Adrian started thinking back on everything that had just gone down in Callista. The flood that wrecked the place, the way the skies finally cleared up, and all the chaos from rebuilding the bridge. He had no clue how he'd explain it all. I mean, nobody expected the Lord to come home from the capital and randomly throw high-level magic around. His thoughts got interrupted when Lakia came over and asked if he was planning to head back right away. Adrian said he should, but wanted to explain the situation first. One of the maids, standing in the back, seemed to realize something. Freaked out and hurried out, saying she'd excuse herself. Adrian noticed that nobody was asking questions. Lakia had already handled things, getting everyone to keep quiet about what really happened. Later, the whole squad used the big warp gate to travel back to the capital. This was Ryuji's first time, and it totally blew his mind. He kept stammering, asking Asa what just happened, since the whole room had suddenly changed around him. Asa just grinned and teased him, saying Adrian was pretty much a legend. Meanwhile, our MC was lost in thought, knowing that even though the trip back was smooth, new problems were definitely waiting for him. As soon as they got home, Regina sprinted over and called out Adrian's name. She started scolding him hard, demanding to know where he'd been, and saying she'd nearly called the guards to report him missing. She said she'd been worried all night. Adrian just stood there, getting the full lecture, thinking to himself that he'd only planned to test the warp gate for a second and come right back. That was high-level magic, and he never wanted to tell the family he'd gone all the way to Callista. But after a disaster like that, he figured his mom and sister deserved to know the truth anyway. When Adrian's mother came into the room, our hero didn't even flinch. He just told her straight up that he had gone to visit their territory. Later, they all sat together in the living room, and Adrian explained everything that had happened. His mom listened quietly, sipping her tea. She finally repeated what he said, sounding like she didn't believe a word of it. She asked if he was really saying there had been a flood in their territory. Our boy confirmed it. He calmly explained that nobody had died and that he had already left the rest of the cleanup and rescue stuff to the local people in charge. But Regina wasn't buying it. She leaned in with that classic, suspicious sister look. She pointed out that Callista always got heavy rain this time of year, but it had never flooded before, not even once. She also reminded him that their territory was 10 days away from the capital. So, how did he expect her to believe that he went there last night and got back by lunchtime? Their mom gently called Regina's name, warning her to chill out. She just sighed, gave a little scoff, but then backed off. She said she would stop asking questions. Then, his mom told Adrian that she understood it must have been tough to handle alone, and thanked him for taking care of things. Then her sister said that if he ever went back, he should say hello to the servants for her. Adrian paused, then gave her a soft smile and thanked her back. Bro, you could tell the whole vibe was still a bit awkward, but at least no one was yelling. Elsewhere in the house, Asa and Ryuji were having their own quiet chat. Asa asked if Ryuji was really okay, just hanging around here, instead of going home. But Ryuji brushed it off, acting all confident, saying there was no problem, since he had been searching for Asa this whole time. Suddenly, someone called Asa's name. When he turned around, Lakia was standing there, looking serious. He said sorry for barging in and asked if he could talk to Asa for a moment. Asa nodded and told him to go ahead, but Lakia paused, looking awkward, and said he wanted to talk alone, just the two of them. Then, Ryuji got the hint fast. He bowed, said he'd come back when they were finished, and turned toward the window. Lakia frowned and pointed out that the door was the other way. But before he could even finish, Ryuji just jumped out the window. Dude didn't even care. Lakia just stood there, frozen, like, what the hell? Now, Asa didn't even blink. He just asked what Lakia wanted. Lakia took a deep breath, then explained he wasn't trying to poke into Asa's personal problems, not even the ones Adrian didn't ask about. But he warned Asa, if Asa had done something wrong and was hiding from his people, then staying with him would put Adrian in danger. If there was anything serious, he wanted to know now, before things got worse. Asa instantly denied it, stammering and looking nervous. He insisted it wasn't like that at all. He said his situation was personal, not criminal. Lakia stared at him for a moment, thinking about how Adrian always said the cat people didn't live with humans, and that Asa was only staying here for a while. And it's confirmed by Asa too. He finally nodded and said he understood, and promised to stop interfering in Asa's business. But right before he could leave, Asa's eyes went to the fancy sword on Lakia's belt. He tilted his head, super curious, and asked about it. Lakia stopped and looked down, and realized he had messed up. He explained that Adrian gave it to him, but it was way too special for someone like him. So, he planned to give it back. Asa's eyes lit up like a kid in a candy store. He leaned in and said he wanted the sword for himself. Lakia shot him down immediately, saying the sword was not a toy and definitely not just any regular weapon. He told Asa it was a real dragon armament that nobody in the world knew about yet. But Asa argued back, saying if Lakia was just going to give it back to Adrian, then whoever Adrian gave it to next would be up to him anyway. Then, Lakia paused, realizing Asa kinda had a point, even if it was just for his own benefit. He started to panic, imagining Adrian's reaction. He could totally hear Adrian saying, if Lakia doesn't want the sword and Asa does, then Asa can have it. That's why I brought it for you guys anyway. Lakia felt his brain melting at that thought, so he quickly turned away and said he would just keep the sword himself. Asa exploded, accusing Lakia of being petty for not sharing. Lakia fired back, saying he got it first, so it was his. And just like that, the two of them started bickering like kids in a sandbox. Meanwhile, in another room, our protagonist Regina and his mom could hear the whole mess. He sighed under his breath and wondered if those two were fighting again. A few days passed after the whole flood disaster in Callista. Now, Adrian and Regina were riding in a carriage on their way to the Imperial Palace. Regina sat with her hands squeezed together. She looked nervous and a little excited. She turned to her brother and admitted that she really didn't know how to act around the big-shot nobles or the emperor. She was worried she'd look silly or mess up the manners. Our MC gave her a warm smile and told her not to stress. He reminded her they were official guests of the emperor himself, so she could sit up straight and be proud. That helped a little. She took a deep breath and nodded, saying she would do her best. As the carriage rolled along, Adrian's mind drifted back to the day before, when they got the invitation to the palace. It had only been a few days since the flood hit Callista. Lakia had been off training, super focused on learning to use his new sword. He even called it a ridiculous gift, and swore he'd get good enough to use it properly. Asa had spent most of his time talking with Ryuji. Those were honestly a relief for our MC. Now that both Asa and Lakia knew the truth about Seyfried, Adrian figured it was probably time for him to head back to his secret lair and get caught up on his magic training. Dude never got a break. When he was going to the lair, out of nowhere, Regina came blasting through the door like a hurricane. She was shouting his name, her face all red, looking half excited and half freaked out. The poor guy jumped and asked what the hell was going on, guessing maybe she'd gotten another letter from the emperor. Regina, still out of breath, nodded and waved a fancy-looking letter around. She said that His Majesty had invited both of them to a banquet for the next evening. Our boy couldn't believe it. He just repeated the word tomorrow, like he was trying to make sure he heard her right. Fast forward to the present, their carriage rolled up and stopped right in front of the massive palace gates. Adrian got out first and then offered Regina his hand, helping her step down like a real gentleman. Together, the siblings walked through these huge, shiny halls, heading straight for the fancy dining chamber. While they walked, our MC couldn't help thinking how this was the real deal. They were heading right into the heart of imperial power, now. When they finally made it to the grand dining hall, the emperor himself greeted them. His Majesty called out for Count Callista to come in, his voice sounding super friendly. So, After some polite hellos, Adrian and Regina took their seats at this giant table. The Emperor smiled and said their last meeting had been kind of wild and surprising. So, he'd really been looking forward to chatting with Adrian again. Our boy kept it classy. He bowed his head and said it was a huge honor to be invited. But while he acted polite, he was secretly thinking to himself that this whole setup was pretty weird. It was just him, his sister, the Emperor, and Count Ivan Rumbly. No other nobles, which was not the usual way things went. From his other life, our MC remembered that the Emperor never picked sides with nobles, so having a private dinner like this was definitely new and kind of suspicious. Across the table, Count Ivan was in a super good mood. He greeted Adrian, saying it had been so long that he almost forgot what Adrian looked like. Adrian gave him a little smile and nodded back, saying hello in return. But mostly, he kept an eye on the Emperor, because something felt different about the guy. He couldn't put his finger on it, but the Emperor's vibe was not the same as before. Maybe he just seemed more serious, or maybe there was something in his eyes. The servant started bringing out the first course. Regina's eyes went big when she tasted the soup, and she leaned forward, quietly freaking out about how awesome it was. The Emperor noticed and asked if something was wrong with the food. Regina panicked a bit and waved her hands, saying, "No way. It was just that she'd never tasted anything this good before." Adrian tried it too and said it was actually pretty wild. Salty, but with a really nice smell. Then, the Emperor laughed and said the soup was made from clams and shrimp, and that it was one of his favorites. He seemed super happy they liked it. It was not the kind of meal people usually got. The Emperor must really care about Count Callista, if he was serving stuff this rare. Now, the Emperor turned to Regina and asked if she usually ate seafood. She said she just ate dried or pickled seafood every now and then. Adrian explained that Callista was so far from the ocean that fresh seafood was basically impossible to get. The Emperor laughed again and said even in the capital, fresh seafood was hard to come by. Because it spoiled so fast, it was expensive, and usually just for nobles. Our boy listened and realized that even a guy like the Emperor didn't get everything he wanted, not even food. The Emperor went on, saying it was a shame that only rich people could try things this good. He wished more people could have it. That got he thinking, this guy really was different from the usual nobles. The meal kept going, with more food coming out, and everyone just enjoyed themselves. By the time dessert hit the table, Regina was all smiles and thanked the Emperor for such an amazing meal. Adrian agreed, saying he was grateful for the rare foods. Inside, Adrian was kind of surprised. Everything had gone smoothly. No weird drama, no sketchy questions, nothing out of the ordinary. He wondered if this was actually just a friendly dinner. But then the Emperor cleared his throat and said he wanted to talk more, if they had time. Adrian said sure, ready for whatever was next. Then the Emperor added, in a chill voice, that he wanted to talk not as Emperor to a Count. Our boy was confused. He quietly repeated, not as the Count, like he wasn't sure he heard right. Even Regina looked puzzled, her face getting a little red as she tilted her head. Before either of them could really react, Count Ivan suddenly jumped to his feet. He was bursting with energy, grinned wide, and grabbed Adrian by the arm. He shouted that he wanted to borrow Count Callista for a bit. The Emperor just laughed and told Ivan not to get too wild with their guest. Our boy barely had time to figure out what was happening. Ivan yanked him right out of his chair and started hauling him toward the door. Adrian tried to ask where they were even going, saying the conversation with the Emperor wasn't finished yet, but Ivan just told him to hurry up and said he'd get it soon enough. As they hit the hallway, Adrian managed to shout back to his sister, telling her he'd be back soon, and asking her to take care of things with the Emperor while he was gone. As soon as the doors shut behind Adrian and Ivan, the big, fancy dining hall got super quiet. The Emperor and Regina just looked at each other for a second. But you know what? The story didn't stick around, because our boy Adrian had bigger things coming. So, after a short walk down the palace halls, they fit into a very large room. Ivan threw his arms out wide and told Adrian that they had arrived at the Imperial Magic Research Institute. The way the dude was smiling, you'd think he owned the place. Adrian stared up at the building, checking out all the glowing magic lights and weird carvings. Pretty intense stuff. He thought to himself that, even though regular people barely cared about magic anymore, the magicians here still acted like kings. It kind of made sense though, because this place was like a playground for mages. They could study magic all day, any way they wanted, no one breathing down their necks. Ivan then waved Adrian forward and said he'd show him his personal laboratory. Adrian shot him a look, a little surprised, and asked if he really had his own lab. Ivan puffed up like a peacock and said, every magician here got one, like it was no big deal. They started walking down the hall, but suddenly some random guy whipped around the corner and slammed right into Adrian. The stranger dropped this tiny crystal ball, but dude was fast. He caught it before it even hit the floor. Adrian apologized right away and asked if the guy was okay. But, nah, this magician was not having it. He glared at Adrian and snapped, calling him an idiot for blocking the hallway. Then the guy just stalked off, not even waiting for an answer. Ivan sighed and grumbled that the guy was a rude brat. Then he chuckled and told Adrian to ignore it, since magicians always acted like they were the main character in everyone's life. Our MC laughed awkwardly and said he'd heard that before. Yeah, Adrian, welcome to Magic School Drama. Ivan leaned in a bit and smirked, asking what Adrian thought of the place so far. Adrian just blinked and asked what Ivan really meant by that. Ivan kind of glowed with pride and explained. He said that here, inside the institute, nobody cared about money or noble ranks or politics. Everyone was obsessed with magic, and all they wanted to do was study spells and figure things out. Ivan thought it was the best place for any magician, hands down. That's when Adrian suddenly got it. Ivan was totally trying to recruit him, so Adrian called him out on it, asking if he was trying to get him to join the institute. Ivan didn't even bother hiding it. He said, absolutely. And he promised that Adrian's noble identity could be hidden, so he could just do magic all day, no worries. But our MC just smiled a little and shook his head. He told Ivan he'd have to pass on that offer. Ivan looked like someone had stolen his lunch. He asked why Adrian would ever say no. Inside, Adrian actually thought it sounded kind of cool. Meeting other mages, hanging out in this giant magic lab. It beat talking to himself in Seyfried's old dragon cave. But while they walked, Adrian thought about why it wouldn't work. See, all these human mages had to spend years making magic circles and learning formulas. But dragon magic was on a whole other level. Adrian just used dragon words, and spells happened instantly. That meant he didn't really know any human magic theory at all. If he joined, he'd probably make things even more confusing for everyone. He was still thinking about that when they stepped into Ivan's big lab. Right away, Adrian's eyes locked onto the giant blackboard up front. It was covered in glowing formulas and crazy rune drawings. The dude was instantly sucked in. Ivan saw him staring and said, with a ton of pride, that the spell on the board was his latest creation, Fireburst. It was supposed to be a souped-up version of a regular fireball, but bumped all the way to 5th circle power. Ivan admitted it wasn't done yet, since he was way better at defensive magic for the Majesty's sake, and this attack spell was giving him trouble. The real problem, he said, was the spell getting unstable when he tried to cast it. Adrian just kept staring, like he was watching a puzzle he badly wanted to solve. After a bit, he finally spoke up. He called Ivan by his full title and asked, super polite, if maybe he could try fixing the magic stone himself. Our boy stepped up to the blackboard and started working through the mess of magic scribbles. He was totally in the zone. Adrian thought about how, for most mages, making a brand new spell was the ultimate achievement, like reaching the top of the mountain. Normally, you'd never mess with someone else's half-finished spell, because that was just not done. But Ivan was already letting him go wild, clearly too curious to care about the rules. When Adrian finally dropped the chalk, he turned to Ivan and explained what he'd changed. He said the big problem was with the combustion part, the way the flame spell was built up. He fixed that section and made the whole thing stable, so the spell wouldn't fall apart even at high power. Ivan just stood there and shook. Then the guy lost it. He grabbed Adrian in a massive bear hug and yelled that Adrian was a total genius. Apparently, Ivan had been banging his head against this spell for months, always missing the answer, and Adrian walked in and solved it in 5 minutes. Adrian tried to play it cool and said he'd just made a few little fixes to Ivan's own formula. But Ivan was having none of that. He was so hyped and yelled that the real miracle here was Adrian's skill with runes. Adrian blinked, totally confused, and asked what Ivan meant by that. Ivan explained that spell formulas were basically like runes in secret code. If Adrian could look at them and understand instantly, that meant he could use runic magic easily. Bro, Ivan looked like he'd just found the holy grail of mages, and our MC, he was in for a wild ride. Now, Adrian started connecting the dots in his head. Now it all made sense. Even though he had never seen a human spell formula before, he just got it. Runic language, he realized, was like a translation of the dragon magic he used, and human magic was basically humans trying to copy that with formulas. So, dragon tongue magic was the base, the OG magic. If both kinds of magic used the same rules, then Adrian could totally learn both at the same time. He got super hyped, thinking this magic stuff was way cooler than he expected. But when he snapped out of his thoughts, our MC felt a little guilty. He straightened up, bowed his head, and said he had been pretty rude messing with someone else's spell formula. He asked Count Rumbly to forgive him for being disrespectful. Ivan just blinked, then waved him off and said it was fine. He wondered if the guy he had begged to be his teacher would really care about something so small. Adrian reminded him that he had already turned down the whole disciple thing, but Ivan just laughed and said, "When it came to learning magic from someone like Adrian, forget about manners and rules." Our boy could only give him an awkward smile. He had always thought wizards were super proud, but Ivan really just loved magic for what it was, not to look cool. That was kind of awesome, honestly. While Ivan started scribbling the new spell in his book, the lab door swung open and voices echoed inside. One of Ivan's students rushed in, calling for her master. Both Ivan and Adrian looked over. This young woman ran straight up, practically bouncing, and shouted that he had finished the fireburst spell. Ivan just kind of shrugged and said, "Yeah, that's how it ended up." Then he told Adrian these were his disciples, and said a third one was still missing. Adrian smiled politely, said it was nice to meet them, and tried to wipe chalk dust off his hands behind his back. Gotta keep it classy. Ivan turned to his students and introduced Adrian properly. He explained that Adrian was Count Callista, a guest of His Majesty, and he was just giving him a tour of the institute. One of the other disciples, a young guy, immediately got all tense, repeating the word tour, like he didn't buy it for a second. But, before anyone could argue, in walked the last disciple. Glasses, sharp eyes, big attitude. He pushed his glasses up and demanded to know what was going on, acting all annoyed that Ivan had brought a stranger into his private lab. Adrian recognized him right away, as the rude dude from before in the hallway. He mentioned quietly that they had already met. The glasses guy looked confused and kind of scoffed, asking if they'd met before, and why Adrian was acting like they knew each other. Adrian just held his tongue and didn't bother arguing. The girl disciple looked like she was about to lose it. She said this was not the time for personal stuff. What mattered was that the fireburst spell was finally done. Glasses guy whipped his head around toward the blackboard, saw the new spell, and pretty much gasped. He announced to everyone that it was true, and said he always knew their master would finish it. But he immediately got salty again, saying Adrian didn't belong there. He started ranting that some random noble had no right to be in their lab, watching their magic. He made it clear he thought Adrian was just there to gawk, not actually do anything. That was it for Ivan. He snapped, practically shouting at his students for being so rude, pointing right at Adrian. He demanded to know how they could act like this to someone he had personally invited. In his head, Ivan was thinking, "Dude, this guy isn't just a count. He's at least a 6th circle archmage. He's the one who finished the spell, and you have zero clue." The students glanced at each other, looking kind of freaked, but one of them shot back that Ivan had never cared about manners before. They reminded him that he was always the one telling them not to worry about nobles, or even the emperor. Before things could get even messier, our MC jumped in. He calmly suggested they just leave, telling Ivan there was no need for them to stay. Ivan clenched his fists, clearly ticked off, but listened. As they left, he looked super frustrated. In his head, he promised that when his students found out who Adrian really was, they'd seriously regret acting like that. Heading back toward the dining hall, Ivan let out a big sigh and apologized for his disciples. He admitted he'd spoiled them and put Adrian in a tough spot. Adrian just smiled and said it was fine, even adding that he'd tried to hide his own identity anyway. He told Ivan it was actually kind of sweet to see how close they all were. Ivan grumbled that his students' magic skills were great, but their manners were trash. He joked that if they ever saw Adrian actually cast a spell, they'd probably faint right there. Our boy thought quietly that, okay, even if those three were a bit immature, they had to be the best young mages in the whole empire, if Ivan picked them. He figured they would probably be the next big-shot archmages someday. And, who knows, maybe, just maybe, he could ask them for help with his own secret plans in the future. Yeah, our MC was definitely cooking up something. Anyway, now, our MC and Ivan finally reached the outside of the dining hall. Ivan peeked through the door, then froze like a dude who just saw a ghost. He leaned back and, with this little smirk, whispered to Adrian that maybe they should have stayed away even longer. Naturally, our boy had to see what was up. He took a look inside and almost jumped. There was Regina, his own sister, sitting right next to the Emperor, both of them chatting and laughing like best friends. They looked way too comfy, as if they'd been close for years, not just a few awkward letters. The Emperor was saying that their last big party had been way too stuffy, and Regina agreed, telling him she liked quiet talks with people she actually felt relaxed around. The Emperor then asked how she was handling life in the capital, and Regina said she was doing well, all thanks to his kindness. Adrian turned to Ivan, looking totally lost. He wondered when those two had gotten so close, because yeah, he knew about the letters, but this was next level. Ivan just burst out laughing and teased our MC, saying that even the great Count Callista was totally clueless when it came to romance. Harsh, but true, bro. Later, after the whole palace adventure, our MC and Regina sat together in their carriage, riding through the city. Adrian let out a breath, saying he was relieved that Regina's first palace trip was a win and that she'd done a good job. Regina didn't answer right away. She just stared out the window, all thoughtful, until finally she turned to Adrian and asked in this soft voice if most guys liked quiet, graceful girls. Adrian blinked so hard, he might have pulled a muscle. Was his own sister actually asking him for dating tips? He wasn't ready for that. He stuttered a bit, and then asked if she was worried that His Majesty might not like her. Regina's cheeks turned about as red as a tomato, and suddenly the carriage got real quiet and awkward. After a few long seconds, Adrian spoke again, gentle this time. He told her that she liked the Emperor, didn't she? Regina hesitated, but in the end, she nodded. She tried to explain that it wasn't because she wanted to be Empress or anything. She just honestly enjoyed meeting the Emperor, talking with him, and having quiet moments together. She asked, voice wobbling, if she was being childish, because she knew she should care about what society or the Emperor's position meant. Our MC slid over to sit right next to her. He told her he couldn't say what the Emperor really felt, but as her family, he'd always be on her side. He said she should follow her heart and not let anyone else's opinions mess her up. Regina gave him a warm smile and said she understood. As the carriage kept rolling, Adrian started remembering something Ivan had told him earlier that day. When Adrian asked if he should get involved in his sister's love life, Ivan had just laughed and said to leave them alone. He explained that people their age only wanted something more if you tried to stop them. Our boy sighed to himself, thinking that, sure, maybe he couldn't really cheer her on as her brother, but at least he'd never get in her way.